The massive alien ship dropped out of hyperspace like a dark mountain falling from the sky. Admiral Kane Thompson stood on the bridge of the UEN Constitution and watched through the main screen as the enormous vessel blocked out the stars. The ship was 15 kilometers long and made of black metal that seemed to eat light itself. Every human ship in Earth's defense fleet looked like a toy next to this monster. "Sir, we have incoming transmission," said Communications Officer Lisa Martinez. Her voice stayed calm, but her hand shook as she worked at her station. The bridge crew had trained for this moment for years, but seeing it happen felt like a bad dream. The holographic display in the center of the bridge came to life. A creature appeared that looked nothing like any human had ever seen. It had 4 arms covered in what looked like crystal armor. Its face was long and sharp with eyes that glowed red. When it spoke, its voice was cold and clear. "Primitive species of the 3rd planet, you have 7 solar cycles to surrender your world to the Valdrian Empire. Your resistance has been noted, and will affect your future as our servants. Comply or face complete destruction." The transmission ended, and the bridge fell silent. Admiral Thompson looked at his officers and saw fear in their eyes. He had commanded ships for 30 years and had never felt so small. Outside the viewport, he could see more alien ships dropping out of hyperspace. Dozens of them, each one bigger than anything humanity had ever built. Deep underground in a bunker beneath Denver, President Nathan Clark watched the same transmission with his military leaders. The room was filled with screens showing Earth's defense positions. Every single display showed the same thing. The humans were completely outgunned. "Sir, our entire fleet has maybe 40 ships that can fight in space," said General Patricia Hayes. She was the head of all Earth's military forces and had never backed down from a fight. But even she looked worried now. "Intelligence reports say the Valdrians have conquered over 200 star systems. They have never lost a battle." Dr. Benjamin Ross sat at a computer terminal studying the alien ships. He was Earth's top expert on alien technology and had spent years preparing for this day. The energy readings from their main ship are off the charts. Their weapons could turn our entire fleet into space dust in minutes. President Clark stood up and walked to the big screen showing Earth from space. The planet looked so peaceful from here, blue oceans and white clouds spinning. Slowly in the darkness, it was hard to believe that in 7 days it might all be over. "What about the other governments?" Clark asked. "Are they ready to fight?" "Russia and China have their fleets moving to join ours," General Hayes replied. "The European Union is sending everything they have. But, sir, even with everyone together, we are still massively outnumbered." Admiral Thompson's voice came through the communication system from orbit. "Mr. President, we are getting more contacts. The alien fleet is growing by the hour. Current count is over 300 ships." Clark closed his eyes for a moment. When he was young, he had dreamed of the day humans would meet aliens from another world. He had imagined it would be peaceful, 2 civilizations sharing knowledge and friendship. Instead, he was watching the end of human independence. "Admiral, what are our options?" Clark asked. Thompson's voice was heavy with defeat. "Sir, we can fight and die, or we can surrender and hope they treat us well. Those are the only choices." Dr. Ross looked up from his computer. "There might be a 3rd option, sir, but it would require something we have never tried before." "What do you mean, Doctor?" Clark asked. "The Valdrians fight like all advanced civilizations fight. Big fleets in straight lines. Massive ships with heavy weapons. They expect their enemies to do the same thing. But what if we don't fight their way?" General Hayes frowned. "Doctor, we don't have time for theories. We need real solutions." "This is real," Ross said. "For the past 3 years, we have been working on a secret project. Admiral Thompson knows about it. We call it the Shadow Fleet." Admiral Thompson's voice came through the speakers again. "Dr. Ross, that project is not ready. We only have 12 ships, and they are all experimental." 12 ships against 300, General Hayes said. "That's suicide." "Maybe," Ross replied. But it's better than surrender. President Clark walked back to his chair and sat down. Outside the bunker, Earth kept turning. People went to work and school not knowing that their world might end in a week. Children played in parks while alien warships gathered in space above them. "Tell me about this shadow fleet," Clark said. Admiral Thompson explained that for 3 years a small team had been building ships designed for stealth and hit-and-run attacks. They were smaller than normal warships, but they could become invisible to most sensors. The plan was to use them for scouting and special missions behind enemy lines. "The problem is we never finished testing them," Thompson said. "We don't know if they will work against Valdrian sensors." Dr. Ross stood up and walked to the big screen. "Sir, the aliens have never faced guerrilla warfare in space. Every species they conquered fought them ship to ship, fleet to fleet. They always won because they had bigger guns and more ships. But what if we don't fight that way? You want to use 12 untested ships against the most powerful military force in the galaxy," General Hayes said. "I want to use the one thing the Valdrians have never seen," Ross replied. "An enemy that refuses to fight fair." President Clark thought about his choices. He could surrender and hope the aliens would be kind to humanity. He could fight a normal battle and watch his entire fleet get destroyed in minutes, or he could try something that had never been done before. "Admiral Thompson, are those 12 ships ready to fly?" Clark asked. "Yes, sir, but I can't promise they will work the way we hope." "Dr. Ross, do you really think this could work?" "Sir, I think it's our only chance. The Valdrians expect us to line up our ships and fight them head-to-head. When we lose, they expect us to surrender. They have never met an enemy that kept fighting after the main battle was over." Clark looked around the room at his advisors. These were good people who had spent their lives serving Earth. Now they were asking him to bet everything on 12 experimental ships and a plan that might not work. "How long do we have?" he asked. 6 days, sir," General Hayes replied. "After that, the ultimatum expires." "Then we better get started," Clark said. "Admiral Thompson, recall all our fleets to Earth orbit. Make it look like we are preparing for a last stand. Dr. Ross, get your shadow fleet ready. If we are going to do this, we need to do it right." As the meeting ended, President Clark stayed in the bunker looking at the screens. Somewhere out there, 12 ships were getting ready to attempt the impossible. In 6 days, they would either save humanity or watch it fall into slavery. The countdown to Earth's surrender had begun. Captain Jake Morrison sat in the pilot's seat of his ship the Nightfall and watched the stars through the front window. He had been out here in the dark space between worlds for 3 years, running secret missions. His ship looked like a normal transport vessel from the outside, but inside it was packed with technology that most people thought was impossible. "Jake, we are getting the recall signal," said Lieutenant Amy Carter from her station. She was his pilot and had been with him since the Shadow Fleet program started. "All birds are ordered home." Jake nodded and reached for the communication panel. It was time to contact the other 11 ships that had been hiding in the outer system. For 3 years, they had practiced and trained and waited for this moment. Now the Valdrians were here, and it was time to see if their crazy plan would actually work. Shadow Fleet. "This is Shadow 1, Jake said into his microphone. "The party is starting. Time to come home and meet our new neighbors." One by one, the other ships answered. Captain Helen Grant in the Whisper. Captain Steve Baker in the Phantom. Captain Linda Torres in the Eclipse. 12 ships total. 12 crews who had volunteered for the most dangerous mission in human history. The Shadow Fleet had been Admiral Thompson's secret project. While the regular Earth Defense Force built big warships with heavy guns, Thompson and Dr. Ross had tried something different. They built small, fast ships that could become invisible and strike without warning. Each Shadow Fleet ship used experimental stealth technology that bent space around the vessel. When the stealth field was active, the ship became impossible to see or detect. The problem was that the system used massive amounts of power. A ship could only stay invisible for a few hours before the generators overloaded. "Amy, set course for Earth," Jake ordered. "Maximum stealth. I want us to be ghosts until we are ready to bite." The Nightfall turned toward the inner system and engaged its stealth drive. Outside, the ship space itself seemed to twist and bend. Stars shifted position as the stealth field warped light around the vessel. In seconds, the ship had vanished from any sensor that might be watching. On Earth, President Clark received the coded message he had been waiting for. "Ghost Rider is airborne," came Jake's voice through the encrypted channel. "All birds are coming. Home to roost." Clark looked at Dr. Ross, who was monitoring the Shadow Fleet's approach. "How long until they reach Earth orbit?" 6 hours, sir," Ross replied. "The stealth drives let them move faster than normal ships because they don't have to worry about being detected." Meanwhile, in space above Earth, Supreme Commander Veltar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Dominion's Edge. The massive Valdrian dreadnought was the pride of the Empire's fleet. It had led the conquest of 50 star systems and had never been defeated in battle. Veltar looked at the primitive human ships gathered near their home planet. 43 vessels total. Most of them were barely capable of interplanetary flight. This would be another easy victory for the Valdrian Empire. "Commander," said his tactical officer, "we are detecting unusual readings from the outer system." Veltar's forearms moved as he adjusted his crystal armor. "What kind of readings?" "Gravitational distortions consistent with hyperspace exit, but no visual contacts. Our sensors show empty space." The Valdrian commander made a sound that was like laughing. "Sensor ghosts. These primitive humans do not have the technology for real stealth. Their desperation is making them see things that are not there." But the tactical officer looked worried. "Sir, the distortions are moving toward the inner system, multiple contacts on the same vector." "Impossible," Veltar said. "No species has developed stealth technology that can fool Valdrian sensors. We have conquered civilizations far more advanced than these humans." Captain Helen Grant sat on the bridge of her stealth frigate Whisper and listened to the Valdrian communications that her ship was intercepting. The aliens were confused by the sensor readings, but they did not believe humans could have real stealth technology. "That's their first mistake," Helen said to her crew. "They think we are primitive. They think we can't surprise them." Her communications officer looked up from his station. "Captain, I am picking up transmissions from the other Shadow Fleet ships. They are all in position around the system." Helen smiled. For 3 years, she had trained for this moment. The Shadow Fleet had studied every piece of information about Valdrian tactics. They knew how the aliens fought. They knew their weaknesses. Most important, they knew the aliens expected every enemy to fight the same way. "All Shadow units, this is Shadow 7, Helen broadcast on the encrypted channel. "Time to show these invaders what humans do in the dark." Jake Morrison received Helen's message as his ship approached Earth's moon. Through his front window, he could see the massive Valdrian fleet arranged in perfect formation. 300 ships in neat rows. It was exactly what Dr. Ross had predicted. The aliens always fought the same way. "Amy, how long can we maintain stealth?" Jake asked his pilot. "About 4 hours at full power," Amy replied. "After that, we will have to decloak or risk burning out the generators." "Then we better make those." 4 hours count," Jake said. He opened a channel to all Shadow Fleet ships. "Listen up, everyone. We have trained for this for 3 years. We know their tactics. We know their ships. Most important, we know they don't expect us." Captain Steve Baker answered from his stealth destroyer Phantom. "Jake, their formation is exactly like the training simulations. They have arranged their ships for maximum firepower, but minimum flexibility. That's because they have never needed to be flexible," Jake replied. "Every enemy they fought tried to match them ship for ship. When that failed, the enemy surrendered. But we are not going to surrender." Captain Linda Torres spoke from her cruiser Eclipse. "What about the human fleet? Are they in on the plan?" "Admiral Thompson knows what we are doing, but the regular fleet," Does not, Jake said. They need to act surprised when we attack. If the Valdrians suspect this is planned, they might change their tactics. Dr. Ross had spent months studying Valdrian psychology from captured alien databases. The aliens were incredibly arrogant. They believed their technology and tactics were superior to all other species. They had won so many easy victories that they could not imagine losing. That arrogance is going to be their weakness, Ross had told the Shadow Fleet crews during training. They will not adapt to new tactics because they believe their old tactics always work. Jake looked at his tactical display showing the positions of all 12 Shadow Fleet ships. They were arranged in a sphere around the Valdrian fleet. When they attacked, they would hit from every direction at once. The aliens would not know where the attacks were coming from. Remember the plan, Jake broadcast to his crews. We hit there. Escort ships first. Take out their sensors and communications. Once they are blind, we go after the big ships. Supreme Commander Veltar was growing impatient. The human fleet was staying close to their planet instead of advancing to meet him. This was not how civilized warfare was conducted. The humans should have formed their battle line and advanced to fight. Commander, shall we advance and engage? The human fleet? Asked his tactical officer. Not yet, Veltar replied. Let them fear us for another day. When they realize how hopeless their situation is, they will surrender without a fight. But Veltar did not know that 12 invisible ships were already moving into attack position. The Shadow Fleet had arrived, and the real battle was about to begin. Jake Morrison checked his weapons one final time. The Nightfall carried experimental railguns that fired solid metal projectiles at incredible speed. The weapons were designed to punch through shields and armor that could stop energy weapons. Amy, are we in position? He asked. Yes, sir. All Shadow. Fleet ships report ready for attack. Jake took a deep breath. In a few minutes, 12 ships would attack 300. It was the most desperate gamble in human history. If it failed, Earth would fall and humanity would become slaves. All Shadow units. This is Shadow 1, Jake said into his microphone. Execute Operation Nightfall. Show them what happens when you threaten Earth. The invisible fleet prepared to strike. The battle began exactly as every Valdrian conquest had started for the past century. Supreme Commander Veltar gave the order to attack, and his massive dreadnought opened fire with plasma cannons that could melt through solid steel. The first salvo tore through 3 human destroyers like they were made of paper. Admiral Thompson watched his ships die from the bridge of the Constitution and felt the familiar weight of command. He had known these would be the opening moves. Dr. Ross had predicted exactly how the aliens would attack. Now it was time for the humans to play their part. All units execute Plan Omega, Thompson ordered over the fleet communication system. Make them believe we are broken. The human fleet began to scatter in what looked like complete panic. Ships fled in all directions, breaking formation and running for cover behind Earth's moon. Some vessels launched escape pods as if their crews were abandoning ship. To any observer, it looked like the human defense had collapsed in the first few minutes. Supreme Commander Veltar watched the enemy fleet break apart and felt the satisfaction he always felt at this moment. Another primitive species had learned the power of the Valdrian Empire. Soon their leaders would surrender and beg for mercy. Deploy boarding craft, Veltar ordered his officers. I want their command structure captured alive. They will provide useful information about this species. Hundreds of small Valdrian ships launched from the main fleet and began chasing the scattered human vessels. The boarding craft were fast and heavily armed. Their job was to disable enemy ships and capture their crews for interrogation. But far out in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, Captain Jake Morrison was watching the battle through his ship's sensors. Everything was going exactly as Dr. Ross had planned. The Valdrians were following their standard tactics down to the smallest detail. Jake, their boarding craft are moving into position, reported Lieutenant Amy Carter from her pilot station. The main fleet is maintaining formation just like the computer models predicted. Jake opened a communication channel to the other 11 Shadow Fleet ships. All Shadows, this is Shadow 1. The enemy is exactly where we want them. Remember, we have trained for this moment for 3 years. Trust your training and trust each other. Captain Steve Baker answered from his stealth destroyer Phantom. His ship was positioned above the Valdrian fleet where their sensors had the most blind spots. Shadow 4 in position. I have clear shots on their communication ships. Shadow. 7 ready? Came Helen Grant's voice from the whisper. Her frigate was hiding in Earth's shadow where the planet itself would block enemy sensors. Targeting their sensor array vessels, one by one all 12 Shadow Fleet captains reported ready. They had spent months studying captured Valdrian technology. Dr. Ross had identified the weak points in their ships and the flaws in their battle tactics. Now it was time to use that knowledge. Remember the plan, Jake broadcast to his crews. Hit their support ships first, blind them, and cut their communications. Once they cannot coordinate their fleet, we go after the heavy cruisers. The Shadow Fleet had been designed around a simple idea. Instead of building bigger ships with heavier guns, the humans had built smaller vessels that could strike without warning. Each ship carried experimental railguns that fired solid metal projectiles at nearly the speed of light. Captain Linda Torres sat on the bridge of her cruiser Eclipse and watched the Valdrian fleet through her targeting computer. The aliens had arranged their ships in perfect geometric patterns. It was beautiful and completely predictable. Their formation has not changed in over 200 battles, Torres said to her weapons officer. They always put their command ships in the center and their support vessels on the outside. The weapons officer nodded. Ma'am, the railguns are charged and ready. Target locks are solid. Torres smiled. The Eclipse carried the most powerful weapons in the Shadow Fleet. Her railguns could punch through the heaviest armor the Valdrians had. Fire on my mark. Back on Earth, President Clark was watching the battle from his underground bunker. The screens showed the Valdrian fleet advancing while the human ships ran in apparent terror. To anyone watching it, looked like a complete disaster. Sir, are you sure this plan will work? Asked General Hayes. She had commanded troops in dozens of battles, but had never seen anything like this tactical situation. Dr. Ross stood at his computer station monitoring the Shadow Fleet's approach. General, the key is timing. If we attack too early, the Valdrians might adapt their tactics. If we wait too long, our fleet will take too much damage to be effective. And if the stealth systems fail? Hayes asked. Then 12 ships and their crews die and Earth falls to the Empire, Ross replied honestly. But if we do nothing, we lose anyway. Supreme Commander Veltar was feeling confident as his boarding craft closed in on the fleeing human ships. This species was even weaker than his intelligence reports had suggested. Their fleet had broken apart at the first sign of real combat. Commander, his tactical officer reported, our boarding parties are in position to begin capture operations. Excellent, Veltar replied. Once we have their leaders, this pathetic resistance will end. But at that exact moment, Jake Morrison gave the order that would change everything. All Shadow units, this is Shadow 1. Execute Operation Nightfall. Strike now! 12 ships decloaked simultaneously around the Valdrian fleet. For 3 seconds, the aliens had no idea what was happening. Their sensors showed empty space one moment and enemy vessels the next. It was impossible according to everything. They knew about warfare. Captain Torres fired first. The Eclipse's railguns sent solid metal projectiles screaming across space at incredible speed. The rounds punched through the shields of a Valdrian communication ship and tore the vessel apart from the inside. Captain Baker's destroyer Phantom appeared directly above a sensor array cruiser and opened fire with all weapons. The alien ship's defensive systems had been designed to stop energy weapons. They were completely useless against high-speed metal projectiles. All around the Valdrian fleet, Shadow Fleet ships materialized and attacked. They struck from above and below and from every side angle. The aliens had never faced an enemy that could appear anywhere without warning. What is happening? Veltar shouted as his bridge shook from nearby explosions. Where did these ships come from? His tactical officer was frantically working at his control station. Sir, our sensors show 12 new enemy vessels, but that is impossible. They were not there a moment ago. How are they penetrating our detection systems? Veltar demanded. Unknown commander. Their stealth technology appears to bend space itself around their ships. Captain Grant's frigate Whisper had appeared right next to a Valdrian supply ship. Her railguns fired at point-blank range, and the alien vessel exploded in a ball of fire. "This is Shadow 7, she broadcast to the fleet. "First target destroyed!" The Shadow Fleet's attack plan was working perfectly. They had studied Valdrian ship designs for months and knew exactly where to hit for maximum damage. Their railguns punched through armor and shields like they were not even there. But Jake knew they could not keep this up for long. "All shadows report power levels," he ordered over the communication channel. "Shadow 4 at 70%. Baker replied from the Phantom. "Shadow 7 at 65%, Grant reported from the Whisper. One by one, the other captains reported their power levels. The stealth systems were draining their generators faster than expected. They had maybe 30 minutes before they would have to shut down the cloaking fields. "Then we better make the next 30 minutes count," Jake said. "All units target the heavy cruisers. Hit them hard and fast." Supreme Commander Veltar watched in growing horror as his fleet was torn apart by invisible enemies. 7 of his cruisers were already destroyed and more were taking damage every second. This was not how warfare was supposed to work. "All ships maximum defensive positions," he ordered. "Activate all point defense systems." But the Valdrian point. Defense weapons were designed to stop missiles and energy beams. They could not track or hit ships that appeared and disappeared without warning. The Shadow Fleet continued its deadly dance around the alien formation. The battle had become exactly what Dr. Ross had hoped for. Instead of a straight fight between two fleets, it had turned into a hunt. The Shadow Fleet were the hunters, and the Valdrians were the prey. Supreme Commander Veltar felt something he had not experienced in decades of conquest: fear. His tactical display showed chaos as human ships appeared and vanished like ghosts. They struck at his formation's weak points with deadly accuracy, then disappeared before his weapons could lock onto them. "How are they penetrating our sensor grid?" he demanded from his tactical officer. The bridge of the Dominion's edge shook as another nearby cruiser exploded. Debris bounced off the flagship's shields. His science officer's voice trembled as he replied. "Unknown commander. Their stealth technology appears to manipulate space-time itself. We cannot maintain target locks." Veltar had conquered 47 star systems for the Valdrian Empire. He had faced energy weapons and kinetic bombardments and nuclear missiles. But he had never fought an enemy that could become invisible at will. Every tactical doctrine in the Valdrian military assumed you could see your targets. On Earth, President Clark watched the battle through Admiral Thompson's tactical feed. The main display showed the Valdrian fleet in complete disarray. Ships were exploding every few seconds as the Shadow Fleet continued its deadly attacks. "How long can they maintain this assault?" Clark asked Dr. Ross. Ross monitored the power readings from all 12 Shadow Fleet vessels. "Not much longer, sir. The stealth generators are consuming massive amounts of energy. Maybe 20 more minutes before they have to decloak permanently." General Hayes leaned forward in her chair. "And then what happens?" "Then 12 ships face 300 in open combat," Ross replied grimly. "The math is not in our favor." Captain Jake Morrison heard the same warning from his engineer commander Pete Johnson. "Skip, we are down to 40% power reserves. The stealth system is eating our reactor output." Jake looked at his tactical display showing the positions of his ships around the Valdrian fleet. They had destroyed 19 enemy cruisers and damaged dozens more, but the alien flagship and its heavy escorts were still intact. "Then we better finish this while we still can," Jake said. "All Shadow units prepare for final assault phase. Target the command ship." Captain Steve Baker's destroyer Phantom had been dancing between Valdrian cruisers for 20 minutes. His ship would appear, fire its railguns, and vanish again before the aliens could respond. But his power levels were dropping fast. "Jake, this is Shadow 4, Baker reported over the communication channel. "I am down to 35% power. One more attack run, and I will have to stay visible." "Copy, Shadow 4, Jake replied. "Make your last shot count." Captain Helen Grant was having the same problem on her frigate Whisper. The stealth field was designed for short reconnaissance missions, not extended combat operations. "Shadow 1, this is Shadow 7. I am reading critical power levels on half the fleet." Jake knew they were running out of time. The Shadow fleet had done incredible damage, but the Valdrian command structure was still intact. If Supreme Commander Veltar escaped, he would report everything back to the Empire. Other Valdrian fleets would adapt their tactics. All Shadows. Listen carefully. Jake broadcast to his ships. "We have one chance left. All vessels target the Dominion's edge simultaneously. Full power attack on my mark." Supreme Commander Veltar watched his fleet being systematically destroyed by an enemy. He could barely see. 19 cruisers gone, dozens more damaged. His perfect formation had become a scattered mess of burning ships and debris. "Commander," his tactical officer reported with panic in his voice. "We are detecting massive power buildups from multiple sources. The invisible ships are preparing for something." "All vessels maximum shields," Veltar ordered. "Evasive maneuvers." But Captain Morrison had studied Valdrian psychology for 3 years. He knew their greatest weakness was not technological, but cultural. They had never faced an enemy that refused to fight by the rules of civilized warfare. The Valdrians always expect their enemies to surrender after the main fleet is defeated, Dr. Ross had explained during training. They have no experience with guerrilla tactics or asymmetric warfare. Jake opened a channel to all Shadow Fleet ships. "This is it, people. Everything we have trained for comes down to the next 60 seconds. Show them what humans do when our backs are against the wall." "Captain." Linda Torres positioned her cruiser Eclipse directly above the Valdrian flagship. Her ship's railguns were charged to maximum power. "Shadow 2 in position. I have a clear shot at their command bridge." "Shadow 4 ready," reported Baker from the Phantom. His destroyer had taken position below the Dominion's edge, where its weapons could target the ship's reactor section. One by one, all 12 Shadow Fleet captains reported ready. They formed a perfect sphere around the massive Valdrian dreadnought. When they fired, their combined firepower would be focused on a single target. "All Shadows, this is Shadow 1, Jake said into his microphone. "Execute endgame protocol. Fire everything." 12 ships decloaked simultaneously around the Dominion's edge. For a brief moment, the Valdrian flagship was surrounded by a ring of human vessels like predators closing in for the kill. Then every Shadow Fleet ship opened fire at once. Gun projectiles screamed through space at nearly light speed. They struck the Valdrian dreadnought's shields and punched through like the barriers were made of tissue paper. The flagship's defensive systems had been designed to stop conventional energy weapons. They were useless against the concentrated kinetic bombardment. Supreme Commander Veltar was thrown to the deck as his ship shuddered under the massive impacts. Explosions rippled along the hull as the human projectiles tore through armor plating. Emergency alarms screamed throughout the vessel. "Damage report," Veltar shouted over the noise. "Shields down to 20%. His tactical officer replied. "Hull breaches on 7 decks. Main reactor showing critical fluctuations." The bridge lights flickered as another salvo from the human ships hammered the dreadnought. Veltar pulled himself back to his feet and looked at the tactical display. 12 enemy vessels had appeared around his flagship like they had materialized out of thin air. "How is this possible?" he said to himself. In 300 years of Valdrian expansion, no primitive species had ever developed technology this advanced. These humans were supposed to be barely capable of interplanetary flight. Captain Morrison watched his ship's railguns cycle for another shot. The Nightfall's weapons had punched deep holes in the alien flagship's hull, but the ship was so massive, it would take dozens more hits to destroy it completely. "Amy, how much power do we have left?" he asked his pilot. "Maybe 5 minutes of stealth, sir," Amy Carter replied. "After that, we fight in the open." "Then let's make these 5 minutes count," Jake said. He opened the fleet channel. "All shadows. Continue firing. Take that ship apart piece by piece." The Shadow Fleet poured everything they had into the Valdrian flagship. Railgun rounds struck the dreadnought from every angle. Armor plating peeled away like metal skin. Internal explosions lit up the ship's hull from the inside. Supreme Commander Veltar felt his mighty vessel dying around him. The Dominion's Edge had led the conquest of 50-star systems. It had been the pride of the Valdrian fleet. Now it was being torn apart by a species he had dismissed as primitives. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "we are receiving a transmission from the human fleet." "Put it through," Veltar ordered. Captain Morrison's voice crackled through the damaged alien communication system. "Supreme Commander, this is Captain Jake Morrison of the Human Shadow Fleet. I believe you wanted to discuss surrender terms." Veltar looked around his ruined bridge. Half his officers were dead or wounded. His ship was crippled and his fleet was scattered. For the first time in his military career, he was facing defeat. "What are your terms, human?" he asked quietly. "Simple," Jake replied. "You leave our system, you never come back. And you tell every other empire out there that Earth is off limits." President Clark's voice joined the transmission from the surface of Earth. "And Commander, when they ask you why you tell them, it's because humans don't fight fair. We fight to win." The most powerful military force in the galaxy had just learned a hard lesson about underestimating humanity. Supreme Commander Veltar found himself on his knees as his bridge exploded around him. Sparks flew from damaged control stations, and the smell of burning metal filled the air. His mighty flagship, the pride of the Valdrian Navy, was crippled by a species he had dismissed as primitive insects. The human captain's voice crackled through the wreckage of the ship's communication system. "Supreme Commander, this is Captain Jake Morrison of the Human Shadow Fleet. You wanted to talk about surrender terms." Veltar struggled to his feet. His crystal armor was cracked, and one of his 4 arms hung useless at his side. Around him, his bridge crew worked frantically to keep their dying ship operational. Through the main viewport, he could see the burning wreckage of his once mighty fleet. "What are your terms, human?" Veltar asked. The words felt strange in his mouth. In 3 centuries of conquest, no enemy had ever dictated terms to the Valdrian Empire. "Simple," Jake Morrison replied from his invisible ship. "You leave our system immediately. You never return. And you spread the word to every other empire out there that Earth is off limits." President Nathan Clark's voice joined the transmission from the planet below. "And Commander, when other species ask why you tell them, it's because humans don't fight by the rules. We fight to survive." Dr. Benjamin Ross sat at his monitoring station in the underground bunker and watched something remarkable happening. The alien fleet's communication systems were broadcasting the entire battle back to the Valdrian home worlds. Every moment of their defeat was being recorded and transmitted across the galaxy. "Mr. President," Ross said with excitement in his voice, "they have been sending real-time battle data to their empire throughout the engagement. Every tactical innovation, every moment of their defeat has been witnessed by their leadership." Admiral Thompson's voice came through the communication system from orbit. "Sir, this is better than we hoped. Every alien species in their communication network will see what happened here today." Jake Morrison was monitoring the same transmissions from his ship, the Nightfall. The Valdrian military used an open communication network that connected all their fleets across the galaxy. The defeat of their most powerful dreadnought was being broadcast to hundreds of star systems, Captain Lieutenant Amy Carter said from her pilot station. "Power levels are at critical. We need to decloak in the next 2 minutes or risk losing life support." Jake nodded and opened a channel to the remaining Shadow Fleet ships. All Shadows power down stealth systems. We have done what we came here to do. One by one, the 12 ships of Earth's secret fleet became visible around the crippled Valdrian flagship. They hung in space like wolves surrounding a wounded giant. Their hull plating was scorched from battle and their weapons glowed hot from continuous firing. Supreme Commander Veltar looked at the human ships and felt something he had never experienced before: respect for an enemy. These creatures had used tactics no civilized species would consider. They had refused to fight by the established rules of galactic warfare. "How did you develop stealth technology?" Veltar asked over the communication channel. "Our science division believed it was impossible." Captain Morrison smiled on his bridge. "Commander, we didn't develop it the way you think. We didn't try to make perfect invisible ships. We just made ships that were invisible enough." Dr. Ross had explained the difference during the Shadow Fleet's development. The Valdrians and other advanced species tried to create perfect stealth that could fool any sensor. Humans had built practical stealth that only needed to work long enough to get close and attack. "Your technology is inferior to ours in every way," Veltar said with confusion in his voice. "How did you defeat us?" "Because we didn't try to beat you at your own game," Jake replied. "We changed the rules." On Earth, President Clark watched the alien fleet begin to withdraw from the system. The massive ships that had seemed so threatening a few hours ago now looked like beaten animals limping away from a fight they could not win. "General Hayes, how many ships did we lose?" Clark asked. 17 vessels, sir," General Hayes replied. "But the Shadow Fleet is intact. All 12 ships are operational." Clark shook his head in amazement. 17 ships lost against a fleet of 300. It should have been a complete disaster. Instead, it had become humanity's greatest victory. Captain Helen Grant sat on the bridge of her frigate Whisper and watched the Valdrian dreadnought slowly turn away from Earth. The massive ship's hull was riddled with holes from railgun impacts. It would be months before the vessel could fight again. "Captain," her communications officer reported, "we are intercepting alien transmissions. They are calling for immediate withdrawal from human space." "Good," Helen replied. "Make sure our recorders. Get everything. Intelligence will want to study their retreat procedures." Captain Steve Baker's destroyer Phantom had taken some damage during the battle, but was still combat ready. "Jake, this is Shadow 4. What are our orders now?" Jake Morrison looked out at the stars and thought about what they had accomplished. 12 experimental ships had defeated the most powerful military force in the galaxy. But more important, they had sent a message that would spread across hundreds of worlds. "All Shadows return to base for repairs and debriefing," Jake ordered. "I think our secret days are over." As the Shadow Fleet headed home, Supreme Commander Veltar composed his final report to the Valdrian Empire. It was the hardest message he had ever written. How do you explain defeat to a civilization that had never lost a battle? "High Command, this is Fleet Commander Veltar," he said into his communication system. "Recommend immediate classification of human space as a restricted zone. These beings do not follow conventional warfare doctrine. They are unpredictable and extremely dangerous." The report would reach the Valdrian homeworlds in 6 days. Within hours of its arrival, every alien government in the galaxy would know what had happened at Earth. The humans had served notice that they would not surrender without a fight. Dr. Ross monitored the alien communications as the enemy fleet limped out of the solar system. "Mr. President, the intelligence data we are gathering is incredible. We now know the locations of over 50 Valdrian military bases. And they know we can strike at targets they thought were safe," Clark replied. The balance of power in this part of the galaxy just shifted. Captain Linda Torres brought her cruiser Eclipse alongside the other Shadow Fleet vessels as they headed back to Earth. Through her viewport, she could see the planet hanging in space like a blue jewel. It looked peaceful now, but she knew that would not last long. "Captain," her weapons officer said, "what happens next?" Other alien empires will hear about this battle. Then they will have to decide if they want to find out what else humans can do, Torres replied. Jake Morrison's ship, the Nightfall, was the last to leave the battle zone. He took one final look at the debris field where the Valdrian fleet had been positioned. Pieces of alien ships drifted in the darkness like monuments to humanity's first interstellar victory. Amy set course for home, he ordered. Aye, sir, Lieutenant, Carter replied. Jake, do you think they will be back? Maybe, Jake said. But if they come back, they will come differently. They won't underestimate us again. As the Shadow Fleet returned to Earth, the galaxy was already changing. Alien governments that had planned to invade human space began reconsidering their options. Species that had been conquered by the Valdrians whispered about the day a primitive race had defeated the Empire's greatest fleet. President Clark stood in his bunker and watched the victory reports coming in from around the world. Every human government was celebrating. Children who had gone to bed fearing alien invasion woke up to news of victory. Mr. President, General Hayes said. What do we do now? The whole galaxy knows about the Shadow Fleet. Now we get ready for the next ones who think humanity looks easy, Clark replied, because there will be a next time. The Shadow Fleet had taught the galaxy a new lesson. Sometimes the smallest opponent has the biggest bite. Sometimes the darkness is where predators learn to hunt. And sometimes the species that looks weakest turns out to be the most dangerous of all. Earth's surrender had been demanded. Instead, the galaxy learned to surrender its assumptions about what humans could accomplish when their survival was at stake. The stars were no longer quite so threatening, and humanity was no longer quite so alone in the universe.